Hello, role-playing people, and this episode is sort of a reply to 88Grabarz, who invited me to recap some Demon Chronicles I've actually played. Hello, Gravedigger. It's funny how languages work, isn't it? In Romanian, we mostly use the word gropar, but a variation of that is gropaș, and it means the same thing, gravedigger. Grabarz, gropaș. So close. Anyhow, so I've been working towards recapping Chronicles for a while now, but especially with Demon, where there is so much nuance and the stories are so personal and character-driven, I haven't been able to boil all of that detail down to a short format. I will be recapping a chronicle, but I will have to take it slow and present the protagonists first, their backstories, celestial and mortal, and then once we have all of those details, I can recount what actually happened at the table and why all the little details are so meaningful and personal for the characters. But in the meantime, I can entertain you with some memorable scenes from the shorter introductory game I ran before playing an actual chronicle, which was intended as an extended one-shot, the player's first experience with Demon the Fallen, so nothing too deep or serious, but it was quite a lot of fun, even though it had to be cut short due to a difference in player expectations regarding the game. I'll detail that at the end of the episode. For now, I take you to a family home in Little Rock, Arkansas, in the Capitol View neighborhood to be more precise, where an elderly woman receives a call from her youngest daughter. This older woman had always been a very imposing, dominating and controlling figure in her family. Of her two daughters, the eldest had always been obedient and chose to remain with her chronically ill mother, while the youngest saw her only remaining parent, her only living parent, for what she was, a bitter old widow who felt better about her miserable life by controlling every aspect of her daughters' lives. So the youngest girl became quite rebellious. Her mother wanted her to stay home. She moved out. Her mother wanted her to pursue a career in a more technical field. She made singing her full-time job. Everything done against the wishes of her parent. So over the years, the tensions between the controlling mother and this daughter who simply wouldn't bend the knee grew to the point that they barely spoke. And now, here they are in late September 1999 over the phone, with the daughter telling the mother, "Mom, I know you don't like it, but I'm marrying him. I don't care about your opinion or approval. I'm my own boss, and if you can't accept that, that's your problem. We barely speak anyway, and I'm not really inviting you to the wedding, don't misunderstand, but I just wanted you to know it's happening." So the mother threatens her daughter, warns her not to marry this guy against her wishes, gets really aggressive and verbally abusive, but the girl just laughs in her face and hangs up. In a fit of rage, this otherwise small elderly woman breaks a few pieces of furniture around the house and proceeds to curse her daughter to the best of her ability. She is so angry and frustrated with this whole situation and curses with such fervor that she gives herself a stroke. And even as she's dying, she's cursing her rebellious daughter while her eldest is trying to keep her alive until the ambulance arrives. And this is when Bentineath, a ravener of the Ebony Legion, slips out of hell and into the body of this widow. Needless to say, the visible change in the woman's demeanor and physicality frighten her daughter, who wants to run away and not spend another second in that house. But she is too scared to do so, having been the obedient girl all her life, completely under the sway of her parent. She spends weeks in horror sleeping in the same house as something that looks like mother, but is not mother anymore. Something with distinct tastes and cravings when it comes to food, an entity who restored the host's body to unbelievable health, to the point that everyone in the neighborhood is shocked. How is that bitter old shrew so healthy? The shrew which suddenly doesn't care for controlling her daughters anymore. As the days go by, the Devourer is becoming more accustomed to being in human flesh. And one evening, Bentineath grows distinctly annoyed with some neighbors, two 20-something-year-old brothers who are supposedly toughening up their pit bulls by cattle prodding them repeatedly. Bentineath, of course, recognizes this for what it is: gratuitous cruelty towards animals. Looking out the window, he sees one brother high as a kite, all but begging the other to stop, while the other smug little shit pushes his sibling away, takes another drink of his alcohol, and proceeds to cattle prod the pit bulls some more. The poor dogs are locked up in a small enclosure with a pretty high and very sturdy chain link fence, unable to run or defend themselves, and all they can do is bark and whimper in pain and fear. Bentineath has a little flashback of the gladiatorial pits in Dudael and all of the agonizing, wounded, dying mortals and celestials after the battles during the Celestial War, the disfigured, contorted faces begging for the release of death. And he remembers cannibalizing his brothers in the pit. All of that horrible stuff. So he decides to have a little fun now that he's out, as raveners often do. Just imagine this diminutive, elderly woman walking up to a well-built guy in his 20s, a guy with a very intimidating presence, obviously a bully, and this little woman picking him up by his arm and chest in a show of unbelievable strength, lifting him above her head while his brother falls on his butt in awe, speechless, as she throws him over the fence into the pit bull pen. Bentineath didn't even have to evoke any lures for the dogs to just feel the raw magnetism and power of command coming from what looks like a grandma, but is an entity who existed before physical matter. And the dogs, they rip their tormentor to shreds, just rip their tormentor to shreds before his brother's horrified gaze in a short burst of screams and cries for help. Bentineath also assumes his apocalyptic form and tells the brother who was high and scared out of his mind, "You are now mine. You are now my loyal thrall who does everything I ask, or the same thing happens to you. Got it? When the cops come, you tell them it was an accident. I saw it, you saw it, and pretty soon the neighbors are gonna see it too. He climbed the chain link fence for some idiotic reason. He was drunk and he fell into the pen. The dogs ripped him to shreds. That's our story. Anything else comes out of your mouth, you're toast." And that is how Bentineath, the Disposer, gained his first loyal follower. They did make a pact sometime after this event, but this moment here was particularly vicious and memorable. Another player enjoyed a defiler by the name of Aginor, who returned to the world in the body of a very pretty but very gullible and unaware young woman, barely 20 years of age. Without going into what are some pretty horrible details, I can tell you this girl was abused by a local police officer and left to die. Aginor later discovered him to be an earthbound thrall with some very sadistic sexual cravings. And this is where things are flipped on their head, because for a lot of people, Demon is a power fantasy, a good, epic, fast-paced, action left and right kind of game. But this player built his character in a way that really showed the trauma of the host, a character who is confused and hurt and wants to get revenge but is scared to go for it, ashamed of what happened, and feeling a lot of personal guilt and shame. It was heartbreaking, really, to see a Faustian defiler who had once understood and controlled all of mortals' desires entombed in the body of this traumatized girl and only able to see the world through her eyes. However, Aginor slowly started taking better control of the host over the course of a few sessions, which were the equivalent of little more than a month in-game, and by the last session of the short chronicle, this defiler was wearing the host like a mask, playing heavily into its vulnerabilities and really tricking everyone into dancing to its song. Grade A manipulation right there, and it wore this mask to get pretty much anything it wanted and to acquire the faith it so craved from mortals, while being quite tempted to accept a deal with the earthbound antagonist of the Chronicle in exchange for the police officer Thrall, who had violated Aginor's host, and by extension and memory, the defiler as well. It was, again, horrifying, nightmarish, heartbreaking at first, and frighteningly monstrous towards the end, right, where the demon is just wearing this poor person and their memory as a mask, right, that really shows off the darkness that Demon the Fallen is capable of. This RPG empowers players to tell amazing stories, for sure, but the characters themselves are frequently not in a power fantasy and have some very serious trauma to deal with. In the meantime, in another part of Little Rock, on a rainy late evening, a young man is shaking and crying for his next fix. And in that moment, he doesn't care about his family, he doesn't care about his health, about tomorrow, or even the rain falling on his head, because right now, in his hand, he's got his next dose. He's got his hands on the good shit. And he's not sharing it with anyone. He needs it. He needs to have it right now. So he stumbles into a remote location and goes for it. Shoots it up, but it's quite pure, very potent. And in his confusion and in the anxiety and the distraction, he messes up the dosage on top of that. This young man dies of an overdose on a rainy, late September evening, alone, even though his parents love him and frequently pray for his well-being and bright future. Crawling inside the corpse and forcing it back to life is Ariuk, a slayer of the Alabaster Legion. As he anchors himself to the host body, he realizes the process of bringing it back to life will take a while, and though Ariuk loses consciousness upon melding with the dead flesh, he fully believes the body will be up and functional by dawn. And he indeed awakens at dawn, as expected, but he can barely move. Even though he forced the host body back to life, restoring its warmth and heartbeat, he's very cold and he can barely move. He looks around and sees another 3 bodies, 2 elderly and 1 child, all lying around him in this mobile refrigerator, a freezer, more likely. Knowing very well that he's going to die unless he gets out, Ariuk does what every scared, dying person would do in that situation, probably. Yells for help. The vehicle stops, and he can hear the driver making an angry call. Ariuk is expecting to be let out of the car and taken back to his parents' house. I mean, whatever this is, he isn't dead. This is a mistake. He isn't dead, even though the other 3 clearly are. But for some reason, he's not scared to see them like that. What the hell is going on? and as the doors open, the driver immediately attempts to bash in Ariuk's skull with a tire iron. The almost frozen Slayer can barely move, but he more or less falls out of the way and avoids being hit. He and his attacker grapple, wrestle, and twist around like snakes. Ariuk is trying to get out of the car while the driver yells at him, "You should have stayed dead, asshole." Afraid and confused, Ariuk manages to break the grapple, kicks the driver in the face, and runs out of the car into the nearby bushes, hiding. He's not in Little Rock anymore. He's not in any urban environment, and the driver clearly wants to kill him. So he lies there, silent and motionless, like a gravestone. And the driver, he's searching for this kid like his life depends on it, but doesn't manage to find him. Frustrated and defeated, he gets inside his car and drives off, leaving our Slayer in the middle of nowhere to die of hunger or exposure or whatever. Even with frozen, broken feet, Ariuk can run tirelessly, ignoring any pain, hunger, thirst, or cold. So he runs all the way back to Little Rock for hours and hours. And that is how the introductory scenes play out. After these scenes, over the following sessions, time passes, our protagonists get to know each other and get to know the other Fallen of the city, a small group of Luciferans stationed out here for some very unclear reasons. They interact with regular people, with some children of Cain as well, and, of course, explore the confusion of being in a mortal body and having human memories, needs, and bodily functions. While this is happening, they are very discreetly invoked by a mysterious Fallen who knows of their presence here, one who inhabits not a mortal host but an object, and who courts and showers the protagonists with gifts in exchange for their collaboration and discretion. This particular Fallen has no desire to make its presence known to the others in the city. It considers the members of the local court maniacs and slavers who will enjoy nothing more than to bind the protagonists by their true name, which is also why this Fallen is very reclusive and secretive. Obviously, this is a malevolent Earthbound, but my players don't know that yet. And they go about their respective business, maintaining good relations with their newfound friend. Ariuk, who had seen and remembered the license plate of the freezer truck, follows up on that lead and discovers a group of body snatchers who work with a very curious type of the Children of Cain. This distinct clan, as they call it, is a clan of death dealers, merchants, and necromancers who routinely hire body snatchers to provide them with a steady supply of fresh, well-preserved corpses. As the characters investigate further, digging even deeper into this matter, they actually come face to face with a member of Clan Giovanni, a cursed child of Cain who isn't really aware of what the protagonists are, but knows for sure they threaten the well-being of his operation in this city, so he decides to destroy them. And this is my most memorable scene from this introductory short chronicle. The protagonists standing face to face with the Giovanni. Ariuk is completely disgusted by what this necromancer is doing with the souls and the bodies of the dead. These wraiths he once tended to with great love and care, as most slayers did, are now violated and used as slaves for eternity by this undead monster. Unacceptable. So Ariuk politely tells this individual to release all of his spirit slaves immediately. The Giovanni laughs in his face and attempts to dominate him, but he has no idea what the Fallen are, and the fact that their minds are far too strong for such cheap tricks. So Ariuk stands there, confused at what his enemy is trying to do, and counters this social attack by commanding all of the necromancer's unseen servants to stand down and not interfere. And unlike the necromancer's command, this works. The vampire is caught off guard by this, but he doesn't seem scared. If he is, he's not showing it. His own physicality is far beyond that of a mortal, so he decides to throw a devastating punch towards Ariuk. And just to be clear about this, I roll in the open both the attack and the subsequent damage roll. 2 successes to hit, 8 successes total damage, including potence, which is added as automatic successes as per Vampire Revised rules. This is lethal damage, so Ariuk cannot soak because he's not in apocalyptic form. He takes this punch, this single punch, and he's dead. He's out. So the player declares a dodge and rolls 3 hits. What happens is, the Slayer looks his opponent straight in the eyes as the lethal punch is flying towards him, and simply steps back, graciously moving out of range while slapping the necromancer's hand away. That slap was the touch needed to deliver decay, the flesh-eating decay of the lore of death. In this case, the necrotic energy travels through the arm and the torso of the vampire, settling in the legs. The Giovanni's legs are devoured by rot in very rapid, visible, and quite disgusting manner. And as his limbs turn to ash, he falls to the floor on his back in complete horror, crawling away from the protagonist on trembling elbows, since his legs are completely gone now. With wide bloodshot eyes and tears of blood forming at their corners, he shouts in uncontrollable fear, What the fuck are you?" To which the Slayer replies as he assumes his apocalyptic form in entirety for the very first time throughout the whole game. And he says, "You think you know death? You idiot. I am death." And with another touch, he turns the screaming necromancer to ash. Beautiful. At this point, we decided to stop the game, stop the chronicle, because it had been a lot of fun, and it's better to go out on a high note and remember this experience fondly than to drag it out and watch it go south. What happened is, even though I told my players I'm going for a dark, serious tone, a mature horror story which aims to showcase all the things Demon does right, the Slayer player couldn't help going for a very childish and parodic tone and character. It was intended as a breath of fresh air at first, a very interesting contrast to the other protagonists and my own style of narration. So during session 0, I allowed it with the premise that it would eventually turn more serious over the next sessions. Alas, it didn't. The player hadn't really taken this too seriously, and he struggled with adapting the character, making it more lifelike, more 3D. Right after the very first session, after seeing what the other players brought to the table, he realized he should have prepared better and played more into the themes of the game. And he said so out loud. I didn't make the right character for this. But hey, ultimately, we had fun, and for sure the experience wouldn't have been the same without him. And to be fair, this introduction, had it been played all the way to the end, it wouldn't have had a happy, empowering ending either way, since the Earthbound would have won. In siding with it, the protagonists would have strengthened its position and resources while pushing back the Luciferan presence. In blowing the whistle on it, letting the Luciferans know such an entity is in their city and pulling strings, it would have faked its own destruction. Yup, it would have used the protagonists in a very elaborate manipulation it had been preparing for a long time, tricking everyone into thinking they destroyed it without any doubt, while the Earthbound itself would have simply fled the city in a secondary reliquary that no one knew existed. I wanted the very last scene of the story to show the horrified protagonists being invoked by this familiar voice, either after they'd destroyed the local Luciferans or after they became convinced that the Earthbound had been destroyed. A familiar voice ringing in their ears as their heads almost split from the sharp pain, thanking them for their service. And bam, screen goes black, roll credits. Even though it ended prematurely, without the intended ending, the game was still a blast. So that's how I introduced some of my local players to Demon, all of us actively amazed at how dark and ugly the setting and the story were, but how much fun we were having with that, and the trust we showed in one another to tell such tragic, gruesome tales and all of their horrible little details. Thank you very much for listening. Take care, have fun, and don't forget to play.